Right, so that brings us to our main speaker for the day, and that speaker is Gary Watson, the director and writer of After Twilight, short film and comic book series.
Graphic novel. Graphic novel.
Yeah, no. So, for anybody who's reading or watching After Twilight for the first time, it would be understandable to assume it was made recently in direct response to events which made headlines over the past several years. In recent years, in the state of Texas alone, we've seen the Texas governor declare state-sanctioned days of prayer on which the citizens of Texas were officially petitioned to pray to God asking for rain. We've seen that same governor endorse, promote, and attend, using state resources and in official capacity as Texas governor, a massive prayer rally organized by some of the most extreme fundamentalist religious groups in the entire country. And all of this is, of course, in addition to the ongoing efforts by the religious right to impose a distorted, revisionist view on our history textbooks, as well as attempts to suppress scientific teaching in our public schools in order to promote a purely ideological agenda. In all these gross violations of separation of church and state, it's not hard to see the gradual slide towards theocracy that Gary depicts in After Twilight. But as Gary himself said in an interview, none of that was happening when I wrote the film or when we shot it. But more and more, it's like Rick Perry is using our work like it's some kind of guide. So, with that said, I would like to introduce our guest speaker today, writer and director of After Twilight, Gary Watson.
So while Vic's getting everything set up, I'm just going to make a few opening remarks on what he said is exactly right. This has been, well, let's see, this year is the 12th year since I started this project, and it's gone through many changes, and it started out as a very short script that I wrote in 2001, and it was, I wanted to do something that had to do with the creeping influence of the religious right in government. And I initially thought that I would maybe do a documentary. I have some history in doing documentary work. But I really wanted to do a fiction narrative story. So what I devised was a very short script in 2001 that took the thematic elements I wanted to deal with and put them in sort of a film noir suspense thriller. And it was a little short script. And I was in a screenwriters group that was, I was actually trying to teach myself the screenwriting format. And I brought the script, it was only 12 pages at that point, it was just the kernel of the idea. I brought it to the screenwriters group. And actually I was going to, that was just before I was supposed to present it in September, and then the awful events happened in New York, and I said, you know what, this is not a time to be dealing with things that are divisive. We need to all come together now. So I'm not going to present my script to the group. And then, of course, was it Pat Robertson on TV? It was the 700 Club or somebody, you know, came out with some horrendous statements about, you know, September 9/11 was caused by, you know, gays and atheists and lesbians, and I don't know, whatever else, and I well, no, wait a minute, actually this really is the right time for me to present my script. So I went ahead and presented to the group. The group encouraged me to expand on the idea. So by 2003, I brought on a co-writer with me, and we'd come up with a 30-page script, which became the short film that you're going to see tonight, which is the first physical manifestation of the story that I've been working on. And that was like 3 or 4 years into the project. And then, is it ready to go?
Yes.
So what we're going to do, we'll watch the short. It's 34 minutes long, and then I've got another little 10-minute video that I'd like to show you guys if we have time to do it, which is a little documentary that I made, which is sort of a history of the whole project. That includes my co-writers, the artist, as Vic said, there's a comic book series that's come out of this. So you'll get to see that as well. And then we'll do some Q&A after that.
Many, many years ago.
It's been around a while. You'll notice that in the behind-the-scenes stuff, I had dark hair.
I don't remember seeing the Metro rail car at that time in the movie.
Yeah, it was in there. It's been
It
there
was?
from the very beginning.
Well, you know, this movie, you know, if it's shown to non-atheists, I think, you know, regard it with a great deal of, as being extreme. Regard it with skepticism. This sort of thing is ridiculous. It can't happen here. But the fact is, much worse things really happened to people, you know, in Western Europe for a long time.
Right.
So,
Right, and you know, and that kind of influenced the style when I was making the film. Well, I just love black and white, first of all, you know, and so, but when I tackled this, I saw it as a black and white film from the very beginning when I was first writing the screenplay. But then I also wanted to a little bit capture the feeling of the Hollywood movies from the 40s that were about countries in turmoil during the war, and even newsreel footage. You'll notice when the guy gets captured on the corner, when Jen comes up to the corner to meet her contact, and the guy's like trying to wave her off, and they come. I shot him from across the street. I never did any close-ups of that because I was thinking back to all the newsreel film I saw of people being wrestled down and, you know, on the streets in European cities. And it's always, you know, it's a newsreel cameraman and he's not like right up against what's happening. He's across the street. So I decided when I shot that scene, I wanted to be close to Jen and be in her world. I'm on the safe side of the street with her. And the view that I had of the action that was going on was from a newsreel cameraman's viewpoint from across the street. So those kind of things did influence sort of where we were going stylistically with telling the story. And it was true when we were writing the script. Well, and I think I said it in the second film. You know, it's all started out. I wanted to do something about what I felt was creeping power by the religious right. I was reading about the Dominionists and other groups, and then at the same time when the Taliban was so much in the news in Afghanistan, and I was reading about how the Taliban had their morality police or religious police, whatever they called them, you know, and all the things that people couldn't do, couldn't play music, couldn't, you know, have televisions and so on and so forth. And I just kind of took the two ideas and I said, okay, here are these groups over here in our country who want to create a theocratic government, and some even so extreme to want to replace, you know, constitutional laws with biblical laws, Old Testament laws, and I thought, okay, well, let's just let that happen on film. Let's write a story to where they actually get what they want. What does that cause? What happens? And so that was sort of the where I started with the whole project. And like I said, that was 12 years ago when I started it. So it's been something that it's been very close to me, and I've been very committed to for all this time, and trying to turn the volume up on its presentation and expand it out into the world. The amazing thing is, and I found this more as I got into the comic book, the DVD, we had just some distribution of the DVD after we did that. And when we did the comic book, we self-published and self-distributed. And last year we spent most of our efforts to distributing the comic book. And we found supporters all across the country for the comic book series. There was 2 1/3 of us. We have a part-time person. We 2 1/3 of us who were making sure the comic book got created. We had artists in Austin. But we were getting the art files, we were putting together the books, taking them to the printer, and doing all the marketing and all of the mailing and distribution of the books to comic book stores and to online sales. But the thing that is so amazing to me, and I sometimes wonder how we have gotten to where we are, and even in Texas, when I would go to a comic book convention to sell the comic books, I very, very rarely had anybody come up to me and say, oh, that's just a crock, that's crazy. I maybe had 2 or 3 people. Everybody else who came to the booth, and even today, I still, at the studio, we have open studios sometimes where I have my office. And I put the comic books out for sale, and I start pitching the comic book when people come in. And people go, oh, you mean today? Oh, is Rick Perry in it? Oh, everybody gets it, and everybody seems to be in tune. Once again, I very, very rarely run across a person who wants to argue the point with me that, oh, this is just crazy talk. And it makes me wonder, well, am I just running in the circles that accept, what I'm saying, or is there like a small number of people who seem to be running the show? I don't know what the answer is to that. Yes, sir.
I still don't quite understand your explanation of how you started out with film.
Yeah.
What motivated you to go to a comic book? I still don't understand.
Okay, so we once we did the short, and we spent about a year showing it around, and we had really, really good reaction to it. So we said, you know what, we can make this into a feature film. So we spent some time making a feature film script. We had to figure out, okay, well, where do we go with the story? We wanted to use what we had already written as a kernel. And what we ended up doing, we wrote backwards from the beginning of this film, and we wrote forward from the end of it. So we find out some backstory about where this all comes from until we get to the point of Jen in the antique store, and then when she gets arrested, what happens after she gets arrested. So it took us a while to get the screenplay. I think it was probably around 2007 I started going out to pitch the script to see if we could find financial support, a production company, a distributor, anybody who would get behind us on the project. And I just, I hit a lot of brick walls. It's not a cheap film. Unfortunately, you have to kind of create a world. So it's a big cast. It's not like a small romantic comedy or something where you got a handful of people in 2 or 3 locations. You've got big locations, you've got a lot of characters. And I got connected up with a producer, distributor, and I followed him for a couple of years. And one of the things he said to me, says, you need to turn this into a comic book. And I thought, really? This is a comic book? And so I just stuck that in the back of my head. And then as we were trying to pitch it, and people were saying, oh, that's very interesting, but I don't know, we just weren't getting anywhere. Part of this is, in the background, what's going on, the independent film, I came into this, starting to pitch this, about the time the independent film business really got into turmoil, and opportunities for small films got really, really, really tight, unless you're making a horror film or a teen sex comedy or a coming of age kind of movie or something like that. So the opportunities for a film like this are very rare, and you've got to connect with just the right connection to do it. And I wasn't being able to do that. I wasn't finding that connection. But this guy says you ought to do a comic book. And I thought about it for a while, and finally, I guess it was late 2010, early 2011, I decided, maybe a comic book is the right thing to do here. And so I started searching for an artist. I found an artist, I had some test drawings done, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to pull the trigger on this, I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to do the comic book. I took my screenplay, we split it into 6 episodes, so that there was a nice ending point at the end of each book. And then the artist I chose ended up being on somebody else's comic book, so I had to wait for him to finish that. So that delayed us until late 2011 getting started. And in the meantime, I attended a workshop in Los Angeles, writing a graphic novel that Hollywood will buy. So I went to this workshop, and what I discovered was all the changes that are going on in the motion picture industry and how films are produced and greenlit. There used to be a thing called the spec script. Screenwriters would make a living doing spec scripts. They would sit in their lonely little rooms by themselves with their typewriters, and they would come up and go, I have an idea. And they would spend months writing a screenplay. And then they would give it to the agent. The agent would take it to all the studios, and there were people at the studios who would read them, and they would either option it and pay money to option it, or they would pass on it. But writers would make their livings doing that. Well, today, the studios do not want original ideas. Today, the studios want to make movies about pre-existing things that have already been audience tested. Games, comic books, old TV shows, remakes of movies that were made years before, or maybe even not that far back. Look at Spider-Man, or even Superman has been made over and over again lately. So the spec script business died. So what the guy who was teaching this class was saying was that the way writers now, one thing a writer can do is to take the script, put together a little money, make the script into a comic book, then send the comic book to the studios. And the guys who read the scripts these days apparently don't even like to read scripts. So if they go home on the weekend with 620-page scripts and a comic book on top, and they're going to go home and they're going to sit down on a Saturday and start reading, what do you think they're going to read first? They're going to read the comic book. And not only that, production design's already been done, storyboard's already been done. So much of the imaginative work has already been done in drawing the comic book. So that gives you a leg up. And I did kind of find that because as we finished the comic book series in, I think it was end of September last year. I went to a film market event, the one that I'd been to before, where everybody kind of said, okay, yeah, you and 10,000 other guys have screenplays, it's not for us. I went with a packet with 6 comic books and all my data that I had from marketing the comic book and our Facebook page and so on and so forth. And people were going, wow, this is neat. This is really neat. So I came out of there really excited because I had a half a dozen different companies who were saying, yeah, I'm going to take a look at this. This looks like something, this could really be something good. Eventually though, when it got to the end, everybody says, this is really a neat project, but it's not for us. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, but everybody I talked to encouraged me to keep working on it, but not for them. So, okay, so I had some validation there, but it was kind of a bittersweet validation. So, but that's where the comic book comes from. Today it's kind of a natural progression, and it's amazing the films that you find out were actually comic books. It's not just Superman and Spider-Man and that sort of thing. There was Road to Perdition was a really great Tom Hanks. Was it Tom Hanks? Tom Hanks movie, yeah.
Sin City.
Sin City, right. Men in Black, actually, I found out, I didn't realize it was a comic book before, and apparently it was a very badly drawn black and white, low-end comic book, and that somebody at one of the studios saw and said, hey, this is a good idea. And then you saw what happened with that. So anyway, comic books and Hollywood, there's a real affinity between the two. So anyway, that's how we started going down that path. And for me, I thought, okay, I'm going to make this comic book. It's going to do a number of things. First of all, it's going to fulfill some sort of personal closure for me to manifest this screenplay into a form that can be seen. Because a screenplay is only a blueprint. It's not a thing in and of itself. It is just a blueprint to make something else. So making a comic book would give me that personal satisfaction. It would allow me to disseminate the story publicly. And it would also give me this tool that I could use to further describe what it is I've been wanting to do as another film. And we are still working, we've gone back into trying to figure out the film. And at the end of that second video you saw, I talk about there's an audience who would like to see After Twilight on the big screen. The way things are developing in the independent film business today, I don't think After Twilight will be seen on the big screen. But the plan I'm working on now is actually After Twilight on the small screen. The small screen meaning your iPad, your laptop, your computer at home. Because I think because there are so few opportunities for independent filmmakers today to have any opportunity to get a theatrical release for their films, so many are looking now at video on demand, streaming sites, that sort of thing, to get their films out there. And this is a direction that just in the last few weeks I've started to turn to. So I'm working on that as an idea of a way to distribute the film. Yes, sir.
Isn't the anti-religious content the reason why you might have great difficulty in getting this shown?
You know, I don't know, maybe. And I actually, one thing I do want to point out, and I always say this, and this is in my comic books, I make a very strong point about this. It's not an anti-religion story.
No, it isn't.
It is a story about extremism. And yes, you have really vile characters wearing crosses in this thing. But then you also have the leader of the underground wearing a cross as well. And to me, this was faith gone wrong, faith gone right. Exclusivity, inclusivity, hate, charity. So what I wanted to do is to show, and if you see the comic book series, you'll see that I even show that my belief that extremism of any stripe is bad. It's counterproductive, and it has unintended consequences. Because the story starts out with an act of extremism from the left. So you'll find that the book takes this approach that extremism on either side is just really not productive. But and to that point, and I've mentioned this, the thing was one of the things that happened that I never ever expected with this storyline. We got recommended as a comic book series on a comic book blog that bills itself as the interconnection between the comic book culture and Christianity. It was recommended to their readers as an example of how Christianity can go wrong, and how that people of faith should keep in mind the tenets of love, charity, and not go off in this deep end direction. And I thought that was, I mean, you know, I felt like, I don't know, it felt really good when that happened, you know, because I felt like that we had walked down a line with our story that allows inclusivity on, you know, from a bunch of different directions. So, you know, like Richard in that interview, he says, you know, it's not just for atheists. It's not for particularly for any particular group of faith. It's, you know, it's about extremism. You know, and it's about everybody else living together, you know, peaceably and getting along, and everybody having their own right to be who they are. So, yes, sir.
Gary, for your next installment,
Yes, sir.
we are seeing in Egypt what happens when theocracy meets or fails to meet with the military. Turkey has lived that for 80 years, you know, trying to balance those. Iran has gone off the deep end, of course. And we have in this country massive efforts to evangelize and Christianize the military. I dread the day when that, if that ever should come to fruition.
It is. I think it exists right now.
Well, and as Vic was saying, and when he introduced me, so much has transpired here since we started the project, the last 12 years, that, groups like the Dominionists and whatnot, they kind of seemed far away, I mean, you realize the impact that was going on, but when we had the response right here in Houston, we did a series of promotional videos, little documentaries called Twilight Witness. Since we're a video production company, the easiest thing we could do to promote our comic book series was to do videos. So we did a series called Twilight Witness, which was little documentaries about real things that were related to content in our fiction story. And when the response was announced, I thought, holy cow, this is our story. I mean, this is what this story is about. And we got press passes, and we spent the whole day there. We taped the whole event. And we also, the night before, we went to the ACLU, Americans United Family, what was it, Family Freedom? Anyway, it was a counter event by the ACLU and Americans United. Mr. Visa, and kind of juggled those low interest rate ones around. You know, you take here, and then you do it over here for a while, and then you transfer it to here to get the rest of it made. So we shot 7 days. We shot two days in January, and then our lead actress got cast in a play, so she was out for a while, and so I think it may have been May before we got back into the other 5 days of shooting. We shot a 35mm black and white film. We shot with a Mitchell BNCR, which is a studio camera that was manufactured in the early to mid 50s. And so it was, I mean, even the equipment was, not only was the style, vintage style shooting, but it was shot on a vintage style camera, which I still have. And if I get to do the web series, I intend to use it to shoot the web series as well. The post-production was pretty quick, and I think it was by August of 2004 we had the film finished. So.
Did Kodak come through with the film?
Kodak came through with some of the film, and then we purchased more film. I mean, it wasn't enough film to do the whole project. We came through, we bought more film from Kodak, and also apparently somebody in Canada or somebody was shooting a black and white film, because back in 2004 there were film resellers, and what would happen was if a feature film was shooting a movie and then they got finished and they had unopened cans of film left over at the end of the production, they would sell them to a reseller. There's a bit of a risk in buying from resellers, but I found on eBay a company in Canada that was selling a whole pile of black and white 35mm film, so I snatched the stuff up, and that became part of our movie as well. Yes, sir.
I got a better close.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna clear the room.
Okay.
Here, so, but yeah, thanks.
Thank you.